The call came at 2:17 a.m., that godless hour where only nightmares live. My phone shrieked through the silence like it had clawed its way out of the dark, and my heart, already uneasy, bolted up to my throat as I fumbled to answer. "Mom, don't come," my son's voice blurted out, tight, mechanical, unnatural. "Just don't. You're not family. Not anymore." Then, silence. A click. A void. I didn't move. Couldn't. I sat frozen, the screen's cold glow casting my face in blue as those last words bled into the dark around me. "You're not family." They landed not like an insult, but like a death sentence. I held the phone to my cheek long after the call had ended, trying to breathe through the confusion, the shame, the ache. When I finally reached for the lamp, my hand shook. Its light was pale, weak, just enough to reveal the shadows crawling up the walls, jagged and long, like reaching fingers. Like regret. Trevor. My son. My only child. I hadn't heard that voice in almost a year, not since he married Melina. Not since she took him and wrapped his life in neat corners and pristine boundaries, labeling me a complication in their curated world. She always had a knack for smiling while cutting deep. At first it was missed calls. Then holidays skipped. Eventually, silence. But never this. Never "you're not family." But I knew that voice. I knew it too well to be fooled. I didn't hear cruelty. I heard fear. I stared at the ceiling like it might answer back. Why now? Why that call in the middle of the night, if not for something urgent? Something dangerous? My mother's instinct had long been trained to respond to cries I couldn't explain. And that instinct roared now. I threw off the covers, my bones already aching from the cold. Whatever had happened, he had called me. He might have said not to come, but his voice, his real voice, was buried in that panic. By the time I got my coat, my hands were steadier. Not calm. Not even close. But ready. I was going to that hospital, invitation or not. I didn't care what Melina thought. I didn't care if the nurses turned me away or security gave me the side eye. I was his mother. And something was wrong. The drive was hollow. Every streetlight cast long, eerie beams through the windshield, flickering across my face like searchlights. I gripped the wheel hard, knuckles pale. I thought of the time I drove Trevor to his first ER visit when he was 7. He'd fallen from the monkey bars and bit through his bottom lip. He was more scared of the blood than the pain. I remembered his tiny hand in mine, his tear-streaked face pressed to my coat, whispering, "Don't leave, Mama. Stay with me." Now he was a grown man, married, changed. But beneath it all, he was still that boy somewhere. And tonight I felt it again, that same desperation, only this time, it wasn't him saying stay, it was me, pleading silently with the night, "Let me be enough. Let me still matter." I arrived and parked in a spot that wasn't even legal, not caring. The automatic doors whooshed open like a breath pulled sharply in. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed above a too-quiet waiting room, its pale chairs lined up like tombstones. At the desk, a nurse gave me a look, polite, but suspicious. I gave Trevor's name, and she tapped at her keyboard with glacial speed before frowning. "I'm sorry," she said with professional indifference. "He's listed as private. Only approved family can visit." "I am family," I said, voice firm, louder than I meant. Her expression didn't change. "You'll have to speak to his wife. She has power of attorney." Of course she did. Melina. My blood turned to ice. I sat down because I suddenly couldn't stand. Not from weakness, but from fury. How had I been erased? When did it happen? What form had I signed? What conversation had I missed that let her draw a line through Mother like it was an old address? I waited. Minutes crawled by like hours. Then a man walked through, a doctor, young and tired, and called a name. Melina appeared from a hallway like she'd been summoned by the wind. She looked polished even in the middle of chaos. No makeup smeared. No hair out of place. Her eyes scanned the room and froze when they found me. She didn't approach, didn't speak, just stood there, like I was the ghost of a bad memory. I stood. "How is he?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "He had an episode. He's stable now." An episode? Panic. Blood pressure. The doctor thinks it was stress-induced. "Can I see him?" No cold. Final. Not even a hesitation. "Melina," I said, my voice fraying. "He called me." She blinked. For just a second, her mask cracked. "He wasn't lucid." "Don't do this," I whispered. She crossed her arms. "He said what he said." And then she walked away. I sat back down, rage curling in my chest like smoke. I was invisible, unwanted, legally nothing. But as I sat there, drowning in that silence, my eyes drifted to the admissions window, where a clerk was printing forms, where invoices sat in piles. I walked over slowly, quietly. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I'm Trevor's mother. Could I settle anything he owes tonight?" The woman hesitated, but then pulled up the record. Her brow furrowed. "Well, actually, there's quite a bit already pending. Looks like hospital stay, cardiac monitoring, scans." "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said, digging for my wallet. "I'm sure." The bill was staggering, but I paid it. Because family isn't a status someone else can revoke. Family is what you do when no one's looking. It's who shows up. It's who stays. And no matter what anyone said, my son had called me. Maybe he didn't say what he meant, but I heard what he didn't have the words for. And I answered. I drove through the fogged-in streets toward Mercy General, the same hospital where years ago I'd rushed Trevor after he'd fallen off his bike and blood pooled in his sock. He had cried more from shock than pain, clutching my hand the entire ride, whispering, "Don't let go, Mama." Now, so many years later, I pulled into that same parking lot, headlights slicing through the mist and reflecting off the wet asphalt in warped halos. Everything looked the same, but the feeling, God, the feeling, was different. Cold. Closed. Inside, the lobby hummed with fluorescent indifference. A nurse behind the counter, kind-eyed but guarded, glanced at her screen and shook her head softly. "I'm sorry. He's marked as private. You're not on the visitor list." Her words were gentle, but they landed like bricks. "I'm his mother," I said, voice firmer than I felt. "I know," she said, almost like she meant it. But rules were rules, and hearts didn't count. I didn't leave. I couldn't. I planted myself in a creaking vinyl chair in the corner of the lobby, stiff-backed and barely cushioned. It groaned beneath me every time I shifted, and still I stayed, staring at the steel-framed double doors that led to the ICU. Hoping, dreading, praying, calling his phone again and again, only to hear the cruel comfort of his voicemail. "Leave a message." Like that would fix anything. Then the click of sharp heels on tile made me look up. Melina. Pristine, polished, perfectly out of place in this world of sweatpants and grief. She moved like a woman untouched by chaos, her white coat cinched stylishly at the waist, more fashion than function, her heels absurdly tall for a hospital. Her face gave away nothing. Not fear, not guilt, not recognition. She passed right by me, didn't look, didn't pause, as if I were just another fixture in this place, a vending machine or a smudge on the wall. My heart clenched. I watched her approach the reception desk and lean in, voice low and soft, too intimate to be casual. She slid a clipboard to the nurse, who glanced quickly in my direction, her lips pressing into a line like she'd tasted something sour. That's when something behind the counter caught my eye. The trash can. A corner of a white envelope peeked over the edge, thick and rigid. Hospital grade. It was stamped in bold red. Urgent billing review. My stomach twisted. I didn't think. I moved. Quietly, naturally. The nurse had stepped away to answer a ringing phone. No one saw me rise. My hands moved without asking permission. I walked past the desk as if headed for the restroom. My fingers closed around the envelope before doubt had a chance to bloom. It was addressed to Trevor. Not Melina. Not the family of. Just Trevor Michael Langston. I tucked it into my purse like it belonged there and turned without hesitation, pushing through the lobby doors into the cold, damp air. Outside, the fog had thickened. The hospital stood behind me like a fortress of silence, its lights sterile and far too bright. I didn't stop walking until I reached the car, hands trembling now that it was done. I got in and sat still, the envelope burning a hole in my lap. This wasn't about snooping. This was about answers. About instinct. About the kind of knowing only a mother has, that tremor in your spine when something's off, even if no one else can feel it. Trevor had called me. No matter what he said, he called me. And I was going to find out why. At home, the envelope sat on my kitchen table like a coiled snake, daring me to open it. My fingers hesitated on the flap, but curiosity had already given way to dread. I tore it open and slid the thick stack of papers into the light. It wasn't just a bill. There were itemized statements, pages upon pages of charges, CT scans, ICU stays, resuscitation drugs. But beneath the cold mathematics of medicine, something darker pulsed. Halfway through, my breath caught. Trevor's name appeared, bold and clear, at the top of one form. Patient. Trevor Michael Langston. But under emergency contact and financial guarantor, the name listed, my name, leapt off the page. The person legally responsible for his care was me. I frowned, flipping to the next sheet. A consent form. My name again, printed neatly above a shaky scrawl on the signature line. My signature. Except, it wasn't. It was close. A good imitation. But I hadn't held a pen near that hospital in years. And the date beside it. 4 days ago. I hadn't even known Trevor was there. The air thickened, pressing in on me as I turned to the next page. Organ donation consent, next of kin approval. I blinked. The box beside consent granted was ticked. And there it was again, my signature. Under relationship to patient, someone had marked mother. At the bottom of the form, typed in small, clinical letters, no spouse on file. Patient estranged from family. My skin turned to ice. My pulse hammered in my ears. What the hell was this? I stumbled back from the table. The house was dead quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock, each second sounding like a countdown. I grabbed the phone and dialed the hospital before my brain had time to tell me not to. When the line connected, I pressed 0 for the front desk, then ICU. A nurse answered. New voice. Calm. Professional. Mercy General, ICU, this is Caitlin. I swallowed. Hi. My name is Meredith Langston. I'm Trevor Langston's mother. Someone sent me some paperwork regarding his hospitalization. I need to know his condition. There was a pause. Not the usual kind, the kind where they pull up a file or check a record. No, this was charged. Waited. Finally, the nurse spoke, voice softened. Ma'am. I'm so sorry. Trevor is in a coma. He has been since last Thursday. The words landed like a car crash, sharp, metallic, irreversible. A beat of silence passed. Then another. I clutched the phone tighter. I don't understand. I managed. I saw his wife, Melina, at the hospital. She spoke to me. She said he'd had a panic episode. That he was stable. Another pause. Ma'am, the nurse said slowly, gently. There's no spouse listed on his file. No one has visited him but staff. Not since Thursday morning. I sat down, hard, the receiver still clutched in my hand. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of something that refused to be logical. If Trevor had been comatose since Thursday, who was Melina? Who had I seen? Who had spoken to me? Who had told me I wasn't family? My eyes drifted back to the paperwork, to the forged signatures, to the organ consent form with my name scrawled across it like a death warrant. There was a reason Melina had looked through me. She wasn't trying to keep me away. She was trying to erase me, and whatever she was planning, it was already in motion. The next few days passed in a half-conscious blur, a stretch of gray light and sleepless nights where sleep blurred the windows and shadows pooled in every corner. My body moved on instinct, boiling coffee I didn't drink, answering calls I didn't remember making. But beneath that fog, something fierce took root. Grief had no room to grow. Not yet. There was only fury. And I carried it with me when I returned to Mercy General, clutching a folder of documents, my ID, and the righteous heat of a mother wronged. This time, they didn't argue. Maybe it was the glare in my eyes. Maybe it was the billing paperwork with my forged signature, or the threat of a lawyer I hadn't technically called yet. But the nurse at the desk nodded, wordlessly printed a visitor badge, and led me down the antiseptic bright corridor toward the ICU. The doors opened with a hiss, and I stepped into a room humming with machines and quiet dread. Trevor lay still. So still. His face was pale against the white of the pillow, his lips faintly cracked, his chest rising and falling with the mechanical precision of a ventilator. Tubes fed into his arms. Wires trailed from his chest. Every beep of the monitor was steady, but to me it sounded like a countdown, like something was slipping away while I stood helplessly in its wake. I approached slowly. My throat ached. I reached out and took his hand. It was cool, limp, but undeniably his. My son. My baby. The same fingers that once wrapped around mine when he was scared. The same hand that clutched my coat the night he broke his collarbone and begged me not to let the doctor hurt him. And now, lifeless. Quiet. I'm here, I whispered, gripping his hand tighter. I don't know what's going on, but I'm here now. I won't let them do this to you. The room was still, save for the rhythm of the machines and the quiet hiss of the ventilator. I pulled the chair closer and sank into it, my eyes scanning the room, looking for anything that would make sense of this nightmare. And that's when I saw it. A binder. Thick and battered. Resting on the windowsill beneath a half-drawn curtain. It had the hospital's logo embossed on the cover, and it was open, pages jutting out unevenly like someone had rifled through it and left in a hurry. I stood, curiosity piqued, and flipped it open. Inside were documents. Dozens of them. Insurance forms, transfer requests, change of policy authorizations. Some bore Trevor's signature, some didn't. There was a newly updated contact email. I'd never seen it before. And then, tucked between forms like an afterthought, a loose page with curled edges. A handwritten note. Melina's name at the bottom in her unmistakable, elegant script. Mother is not to be informed. Severed ties. No legal contact. The words hit harder than any slap. I stood frozen, binder still open in my hands. My eyes scanned the note again and again, as if it might change, as if this time it might read differently. But it didn't. She had planned this. Not a misunderstanding. Not a misstep. This was deliberate. Melina had cut me out of my own son's life like I was a tumor, something to be removed quietly, quickly, without drawing attention. And yet, when she needed a signature, a name, a financial guarantee, suddenly I existed again. Not as a mother. Not as family. Just a loophole. A tool. A resource to be used and discarded. I clenched the binder tight, my breath shallow. The rage I had carried with me into that hospital began to take shape. It wasn't just anger now. It was a purpose. A mission. This wasn't only about fraud. It wasn't even just about cruelty. It was about control. But the question that dug deepest, the one that kept repeating in my mind like a fever dream, was simple. Why? What had I done to her? Why had she gone to such lengths? What did she stand to gain by removing me completely, by lying to the hospital, by hiding Trevor's condition? And worst of all, what was she planning next? I hired a lawyer the very next morning, a man named Richard Cole, a retired litigator and one of the few people my late husband ever trusted. He'd handled our estate years ago, back when the world still made sense and Trevor was still calling me Mom without shame or hesitation. Richard didn't waste time with pleasantries. One look at the documents I showed him and his jaw tightened. "Give me 2 days," he said. "I'll see what I can find." He delivered in one. What he found chilled me. There were credit card statements I'd never seen, some in Trevor's name, others connected to a shadowy joint account Melina had opened a few months prior. Luxury clothing boutiques, 5-star hotels, private jet services. Nearly $80,000 spent in just 6 weeks. The charges painted a grotesque picture: designer bags, spa treatments, international transfers, all on accounts tied directly to Trevor. Trevor, who had been working long hours, staying late at the firm, quietly supporting both of them without complaint. Trevor, who hadn't touched a dime of his own income for himself in months, according to his accountant. Melina hadn't worked in over a year. No side business. No inheritance. No freelance anything. Just a woman floating on someone else's dime, and that someone had been my son. Then Richard said the words that made the ground drop out from under me. He upgraded his life insurance policy. My breath caught. $2 million, Richard continued. Signed a week before the accident. Melina's the sole beneficiary. A week. 1 week. Before everything went dark. I felt the room closing in. The air thick with something sour and electric. Richard didn't stop there. He'd pulled the police report from the night of the crash. Technically, a single-vehicle accident. Trevor's car veered off a rural road and slammed into a tree. The initial finding: equipment failure. The report cited compromised brake fluid lines, but the investigation hadn't determined intent. The final verdict: inconclusive. No foul play ruled out, but no charges filed either. And yet, buried near the end of the report, was a line that made my skin crawl. Patient was transported by private vehicle. Woman who identified herself as spouse was first on scene. Melina. Melina had told the hospital she'd been informed of the accident by phone. She claimed she'd rushed there in panic, unaware he'd even left the house. But that was a lie. She hadn't been called. She'd brought him in. She was the one who delivered him to the emergency room. And then she disappeared into the background, rewriting her role in the story to suit her needs. I stared at the page in Richard's hand and felt a coldness settle in my chest, heavy and absolute. Nothing aligned. Not her story. Not the timeline. Not the finances. And yet, no one had questioned her. And there was more. Since the night I returned to the hospital, since I sat beside my son's broken body, clutching his hand, she hadn't visited. Not once. Her name wasn't in the security log. No florist deliveries. No nurse interactions. No contact with his doctors. Not even a voicemail inquiry in the system. She had vanished the moment I stepped back into Trevor's life, like a magician ending a trick she hoped no one would dissect. And now all I could ask myself was this: why was she so eager to disappear? What was she running from? Or worse, what was she waiting for? I found her in the parking lot of her condo complex, just as the sun was beginning to sink behind the buildings, casting long, golden shadows over the cracked pavement. She looked utterly unbothered, shopping bags dangling from her manicured hands, a designer latte balanced casually in the crook of her arm. Her coat was white, again, crisp and tailored, and her heels clicked with careless confidence as if the world still revolved quietly around her. She spotted me and rolled her eyes. "Still playing Mommy of the Year?" she scoffed, lips curling into that familiar smirk, equal parts smug and venomous. I stepped forward slowly, my heart pounding but steady, my voice low and clear. "You forged my name," I said. "You shut me out of my own son's life. You used him for every cent you could squeeze out, and when he was no longer convenient, you tried to erase him." She didn't flinch. Not right away. She sipped her latte like we were discussing weekend plans. Then she chuckled, slow and mocking. "Prove it," she said, one brow arching in challenge. I didn't blink. I raised the binder in my hand, thick with documents, the damning truth stamped and signed, and then I held up my phone, where Richard had uploaded digital copies and his preliminary legal brief. "I already have," I said. Something in her eyes shifted then. Just for a moment. Not fear, not yet, but something close. A crack in the mask. Her fingers tightened slightly on the shopping bags, her jaw tensed. And then, like flipping a switch, she smiled again. Sharp. Cruel. "You think anyone's going to believe some bitter old woman over a grieving wife?" she said, voice low and poisonous. I tilted my head. "Wife," I repeated softly. "You forged divorce documents, too. Your marriage was annulled last month. Trevor filed on the grounds of fraud. You never signed them, but the court finalized it without you. That did it." The smirk died. Her mouth parted, just slightly. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw it. Real panic. The latte slipped from her hand, the cup splattering across the pavement in a slow brown arc. She dropped the shopping bags next. One rolled open, revealing an expensive silk blouse and a bottle of imported perfume. And then she bolted. She turned on her heel and ran, across the lot, past the hedges, heels snapping against concrete, her coat flaring like a ghost in flight. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. I let her go. I stood there in the late afternoon light, the wind pulling gently at my coat, and watched her disappear around the corner. My pulse had steadied. The anger that had burned for weeks had cooled to something sharper, something stronger. I had already done what I needed to. I had the proof. I had the law on my side. And I had the truth. The police picked her up a week later, trying to board a flight out of the country under a false name. It made the papers. Not front page. Not yet. But her face was there, grainy and unflattering in the mugshot, a pale echo of the polished woman who once thought she could bury my son and walk away clean. But not anymore. 3 months passed. Winter melted into a fragile spring, the days growing longer even as the waiting seemed to stretch forever. I came to the hospital every day, like a ritual. I read to him, talked to him, played his favorite music. Little fragments of memory I clung to like lifelines. The nurses began to nod at me with something more than pity. They saw me. They knew I wasn't going anywhere. I brought fresh flowers. I combed his hair. I whispered stories of our life before her, stories she could never erase. And then, one morning, the silence shifted. It started with a flicker, a flutter beneath his eyelids, the kind of involuntary movement I'd seen 100 times, each one leaving me gasping with hope. But this time, his lips moved. His fingers twitched against the sheets. A soft, rasping breath escaped his throat. Then his eyes opened. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough to see me. The world narrowed to that moment. His gaze locked onto mine, bleary, confused, weak, but unmistakably him. I froze, my hand half raised, tears already spilling, lips trembling with words I didn't know how to form. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He blinked, slow, pained. His mouth moved again, barely a whisper. You came. Those two words split me open. I nodded, swallowing a sob, reaching for his hand. Of course I did. His fingers tightened faintly around mine, the effort evident in the tremble of his lips, in the strain behind his eyes. He looked at me again. Really looked this time. She told me you'd left, he said, voice cracked and ghost thin. That you didn't want to be part of my life anymore. I shook my head, the truth trembling on my tongue. She lied. I whispered. She lied about everything. He closed his eyes then, slowly, as if absorbing it all. Every betrayal, every silence, every stolen word. A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye, carving a slow path down his cheek. I believed her, he murmured. I know, I said softly, leaning closer. But you don't have to anymore. And in that fragile stillness, with the machines humming around us and the spring sun beginning to creep through the blinds, I felt something shift, not just in the room but in us. Something broken beginning to mend. Something stolen beginning to return. He had come back to me. And this time, I wasn't letting go. When the final hospital bill arrived, it came thick and heavy, an imposing stack of paper, bound in a plastic sleeve, the kind that thudded when it landed on the kitchen table. It looked like a weapon, like something designed to knock the wind out of you. And for a moment, just a moment, I braced myself for what I might find. More forged authorizations. More lies. More pieces of my name used without my permission. But as I flipped through the pages, a strange thing happened. It was clean. Every document, every signature, every authorization bore only what was true. My son's name, his procedures, his recovery timeline. There were no forged initials, no hidden clauses, no manipulations, just the straightforward, brutal honesty of healing. Surgeries, scans, medications, therapies, line after line of it. Pain made legible. And still I smiled, because this finally was real, uncontaminated, honest. This was his beginning, not the beginning someone tried to fake or twist or profit from. His steps back to life had been hard-won and fully his own. And this bill, in all its weight and ink, marked the closing chapter of a nightmare and the start of something new. I paid it, every cent, not because I had to, because I wanted to, because it was the first thing I could give him that hadn't been taken from me. Not altered, not coerced, not hidden behind forged names and stolen truths. Just mine. Just his. A quiet act of love, clean, simple, and complete. As I stood beside him in rehab and watched him walk again, slow, shaky, but determined, I didn't feel rage anymore. I didn't need it. That part of me had burned out, leaving something steadier in its place. Love, yes, but not the soft kind. The persistent kind. The kind that survives betrayal. That outlives grief. That stands its ground, no matter who tries to erase it. And when he smiled at me one afternoon, eyes clear, voice a little stronger, and said, "Thanks, Mom, for everything," I knew. Everything that mattered had been returned to us. Later, when I filed the bill away, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the very bottom, printed in small, neat font, amount due, $0, paid in full. I ran my finger over the words, feeling their weight in my chest more than my hands. Just like my promise to him,